Alright, is this thing on? Okay. Well, I'm a day late, but I'm still here, and that's all that matters. So, I did not stream yesterday, as promised, because, well, some stuff got in the way. That's all I'm going to say. Some stuff regarding occupations and such. Work stuff got in the way. But, I'm back in the New York groove, and instead, I know I said I was gonna do, I guess my first session of solo AD&D for you guys, but I thought, what if I were to instead talk about my great, I consider it great, my campaign that I pretty much beefed because of my own dumb feelings and insecurities. So, this is going to be a little explanation of how not to do a D&D campaign, essentially, and some of the lessons I've learned as a DM and such. And it's also just a way for me to showcase my dumb artwork I did for this. Finally, the fellas. Hello, Saber. Hello again. So, I'm going to be explaining what DNDFellas as... Look, first off, I need to explain the name. Number one, it's called DNDFellas because I used to be part of the Big Fellas Discord, and I suggested that, hey guys, I'm into D&D, why don't we play D&D on the Discord? And I managed to convince enough people in our Discord to do it, and because Fellas is like a recurring name in our Discord, it's what happened. So, everybody got introduced, or not everybody got introduced, everybody already knew each other, but everybody rolled up characters. Bro, you calling me out, are you? No? Did you not read the description? Technically, I'm saying it's my fault, bruv. I'm explaining how I killed this campaign because of my own weird feelings, alright? But I need to get there. This is a long, sad backstory with a couple of warlock levels, okay? But first and foremost, this is the overworld campaign for the first adventure that I ran. This is Pine Ward and the Pine Barrens. So first and foremost, I used 5th edition D&D because at the time it was the only edition I knew how to play, even though I started playing D&D with 3rd edition. But I honestly don't remember those rules anymore, and I did not own those books. They belonged to friends. It's my fault, I admit it. I do it. I am admitting it. I am admitting it's my fault. It's my fault, I admit it. But I want this D&D stuff off the internet. I'll send in the detectives. I'll send in the police. I'll send everyone in my power. Anyways, so it's 5th edition D&D. It's I think at the time we were using Xanathar's stuff, so it's pretty current as it could be. So the way I like, so unlike, this is technically the second time I've DM'd a campaign. And I kind of just like to build off the same world I make rather than just keep making up new worlds. So in my world, it takes place in the Forgotten Realms. So the default setting for 5th edition, essentially. And it takes place far enough along in the Forgotten Realms to where it's, I guess it's kind of looking more like Eberron, really. There are Steam engines and stuff. You DM this campaign? No, you want to DM it. Okay. You don't understand. I have to get this campaign off the internet, or I have to get everyone from my heart to get off the internet. You you DM it, you undm it. God damn it, Saber. But anyways, it's essentially, I would say 1800s, like 1800s era technology. There are guns. What did I miss? It just started. I'm explaining the background to this whole world. So it's 1800s era technology. Guns are uncommon because they sort of don't work out. Saber, I was going to explain how this worked out. So essentially, guns are not a thing. Steam engines and like all that are a thing, but guns are not a thing because in a world where a magic user, sorry for archaic language, where a spellcaster can throw a firebolt at you, there's a chance it'll hit your gun full of black powder. So therefore, guess what? Your gun misfires or blows up in your face. So, what I was going to explain as I went along was that there were some dwarves and gnomes who were slowly working on applying fire-resistant runes to these weapons so they would be more reliable. So there was a faction of tinkerers and whatnot working to make guns viable in the world. But until then, guns pretty much stopped at like flintlock technology, muzzleloading technology. But everything else progressed. So hence the railroad. So this takes place at a time where a greedy land baron decided to hire a bunch of spellcasters to essentially pull the Lex Luthor from Superman the movie scheme. So what you're saying is Nihilus could have blown his own hand off. No, he couldn't have. It sort of worked. What I'm saying is another spellcaster could have hurled a druid with produce flame, or a sorcerer or wizard with firebolt could have hit Nihilus, or could have aimed at Nihilus's pistol, and then that would have maybe blown his hand off because the black powder in the gun would have gone off. So, if you fought a magic user, if you fought a spellcaster with fire-based spells, yes, you would have been in trouble. Otherwise, I think against bandits and other brigands and stuff who are using this technology, this obscure technology, you probably would have handled yourself all right. I mean, those orcs were wielding flintlocks, or certain clerics of fireball. That's true. So yeah, but again, there were dwarves and gnomes who were like, we gotta make guns viable. This is too much of a good idea. We gotta put these sling bullets in this little tube and whatnot. We can make it work. We just gotta beef up the fire resistance runes. Anyways, so Lex Luthor style real estate scheme. This greedy land baron decides, I'm gonna hire a bunch of these high level spellcasters to essentially not borrow, but like transport land from other planes, from like the other planes, and put it onto the material plane. And it did not work out because instead they straight up just essentially fused a bunch of the planes from the other material planes into the material plane. So now when you travel to specific areas along the continent or around Toril, there's straight up new land that has now displaced entire families and cities apart from each other, because like you would wake up one morning in in your beloved little hamlet in the middle of like the continent, in like surrounded by farmland. Next morning you wake up, you and your neighbors are now halfway across like the continent, because there's now a bunch of like land from, let's say, Elysium, and everything looks cool and nice. So essentially new and unexplored lands were added. Certain lands acted as portals to other planes. There's an Alcatraz style island off the Sword Coast, that straight up leads into Carcery, which is the prison plane of one of the lower planes. So it's essentially, yeah, so which is where that land baron and his spellcaster chums that he swindled ended up as their punishment. Funny that he should end up in a place that he created. But anyways, so it's a couple of years, about a decade or so, into my original setting, which is about these trio of adventurers going to save this, or getting involved into a land grab war between some greedy land barons and settlers. So that's all been sorted out. They won, and the railroad now benefits those settlers, and now they've expanded and are trying to reconnect the continent of Faerun again. So now we have railroads from one end all the way to Waterdeep in the Sword Coast, the rest of the Sword Coast. And this is where our adventure starts off. We got 4 bozos hanging out and looking for adventure. The backstory is they were all level 1, and through their first adventure in fighting a very misguided warlock named Wester, who was kidnapping a boyfriend-free girl, they ended up, by the time the story properly starts, they leveled up to level 3. But essentially, they stopped into Pine Ward, which is a city built in a quarry started by a drow with dreams of building a casino, but was called elsewhere. They pretty much built this like town. I kind of modeled it after stepwells, specifically like Indian stepwells. So you got like this town that like you just kind of see a fairly big building beyond like the big gates and like their various watchtowers, and in the middle you just see like this town that just kind of descends to this like little pool, the well that that people can draw their water from, and pretty much everything is in there. So they stop in the Pine Ward, aka Pit City, and they pretty much go there. Some local Farmer Woodhawk, which I will introduce to you in a second, is just like, help me, he's got her locked up in his dungeon. Essentially saying that his teenage daughter's been taken by some local mage, some sad man. Here he is, and his daughter Emily. Johnson Woodhawk, named after technically a legacy character from my prior campaign. But essentially, who? Boner! I'm glad you got that reference. But essentially, his daughter got kidnapped by Wester, who I never drew, by the way, because he just kind of, we all know what he looks like, by this, like I said, this warlock looking for a boyfriend-free girl. Hollow heel. Oh, no. And they succeed. They defeat Wesker. They actually kill him. And a running joke I wanted to be in the campaign was that no one could agree who delivered the final blow onto Wester. So I would have my 2 fighters essentially arguing over who did it. Either the big Goliath guy, who I will now introduce to you, or the samurai half-elf. But here were the companions. The guys that were. First up, we have Kyojiro, based off of the anime character that we all know and love. He is a half-elf samurai. He comes from look, if we're gonna go by like Forgotten Realms stuff, he's probably from Karatur. The men at work? Yes. He's definitely from Karatur. Or I don't know, he's not from Karatur. Okay, I would say he would have been, but his player, Mr. Taverdius Funkel, essentially he and I established that there is a Japan-style island off the Sword Coast, and he had come here because of a war that had happened, and he essentially is a refugee. He left his beloved tiefling wife behind, and he hopes to one day get strong enough to go back and restore his land. After him, there is everybody, and there is his fellow team father, Nihilus, the warlock of the Great Old One. Both he and he was the brains of the operation. Kyojiro was the main muscle. Nihilus was the brains. He was the one with the highest intelligence and charisma as a warlock. And his main thing was that he had his orb, who he spoke to his patron, a man who sounded like he was from Boston in another dimension. It's him. It's the tax evader himself. Yeah. Well, you can't evade taxes if you're an adventurer running around with your own treasure. Well, technically, you can't be taxed if you wander the countryside looking for adventure. If you never settle into a city, you can't be taxed. He's a warlock, like I said, Great Old One pact. His pact boon, because I was talking to Saber, who is in the chat as we speak right now. His whole thing was that essentially Saber's initial idea was that he was going to be essentially a spell sword. And he found himself being a very big blasty man most of the time. Saber, didn't you use your sword like a few times, but you didn't really have any good luck with it? Eventually, the main thing with Nihilus was he settled on Chill Touch as a signature offensive cantrip, because every time he would use the Warlock signature cantrip, which was Eldritch Blast, he would always roll badly, even though it did more damage. But Chill Touch, oh baby, Chill Touch always hit, pretty much. Yeah, it was always low rolls, but no, Chill Touch for some reason. And also, okay, you would do Chill Touch, and then you would also use your one spell slot to cast Armor of Agathis. And every time you would do it, somehow, and I guarantee this was not on purpose, but you would always do it as extra insurance, and you would never get touched. I think the one time you did get hit was during a later portion I'll talk to you about, one of the most infamous villains I have come up with for this campaign that traumatized a certain cleric in your group. But the one time you did get hit was in that fight. Also, here's an alternate art, more realistic. Art style for old Nihilus. Looks kind of like the medic from... Unintentionally, looks kind of like the medic from Team Fortress 2. You also have on the team Mr. Veril, the Dragonborn, the Bronze Dragonborn cleric of Babe, the Light God. Look, I told this to the guys, but if DNDFellas was an actual play podcast, I've told friends about his design. They said Nihilus is a Delphi. Yeah, to be fair though, you and Tav played your characters as team fathers. Like, you guys were the team dads in a group. Like, if Actian was the rambunctious, high off of energy drinks toddler boy, Vera was definitely the quiet, was definitely the more nuanced, quiet kid who liked weird stuff. So, it's the boy. Veril is the character of all time. That's the thing. So, Veril, I think everyone except the next character who I'll be talking about in a second, and Tav and myself, we're all familiar with D&D. Saber and Terumo were the only guys who were not familiar with D&D. And Terumo essentially rolled up what would be considered the ideal, at least classic D&D approach to character creation, which was just a guy. And Veril started off as essentially just a guy. He wanted to be a cleric. He picked the light domain. He picked his asked me, could Babe be his god? It's just like, yes. So there you have it. And also, when these dudes were rolling their stats, Saber's character and Joe's character, they picked from the standard array. Tav and Terumo decided to roll d20s, which, in retrospect, I should never do again. They rolled d20s for their stats, and they all got main character stats. Specifically, Varel did. Hey, it's just a little guy. What a funny little character. Yep. So yeah, we have this cleric who worships a pig. He's an outlander. He came from living on his own in the woods by himself, and then one day a sign came to him in the form of a pig, and he dedicated his life to him. I would, like I said before, to finish that thought, if this was a podcast, I feel like Varel would be the guy, would be the fan favorite. Everybody would be writing sad fics and drawing cute fan art of him, but then also I feel like people would be shipping Nihilus and Kyojuro all the time in their artwork. And here comes the character that would have been considered the most controversial. Actian, the Goliath fighter, a champion of the champion subclass. So, his creation was maybe the most strangest ones I've ever had to come up with. The wild card, yes. Here's the thing. Initially, Joe, aka Joe Mama, of a popular guest on the Big Fellas podcast, the Big Fellas Radio Hour, he wanted to be a dragon slayer. And I told him, you're level 3, how the hell are you killing dragons so early? He says, I don't know, I just want to be a big guy that shoots stuff. And he's like, alright, what about you be a Goliath and and maybe just so it's easier for you, you just roll up, pick champion type fighter. And just pick archery as your guy. He's like, okay, cool, that works. The thing is, I told him this last time, or after this, I said, if you wanted to be a dragon slayer, what you could have done was pick a ranger, probably pick hunter, pick giant killer, or colossus slayer, and then make dragons your favored enemy. And then eventually, I would have obviously steered it towards you guys maybe fighting a dragon of some sort, and eventually you would have gotten the 2 magical items specifically for killing dragons. He's just like, I was blind at the time, I didn't think about it. He's like, no, yeah, because you want to be strong right off the bat. Anyways. Actian. As I describe everything that these fellas do in the campaign, Actian is the biggest fucking catalyst for everything that goes awry in this game. Like, I feel like he, most of all, created the secret villain of the campaign by accident, just because he's a jerk-ass. And I think Joe's gone on, I think Joe has told me, or at least Tav has told me that, off out of sessions, that he never really intended acting to be a jerk ass. It's just the way he kind of came off. It was never on purpose, but it's just like, I don't know what you're doing, dude, but because I genuinely had maybe the most fun tormenting Actian's player because of all the stupid actions he would do. And I will admit that I always relished when Joe would make Actian do something that would be not beneficial towards the party. Actian be like, for real, be like, I think I'm going to put my friends through more trouble by opening my mouth. Yeah, so let me explain. At the beginning of the session, beginning of the series, the boys, after being allowed to crash at Farmer Woodhawk's barn, go off to the city, and they come across like a city hall going on where the townsfolk are talking about a goblin problem that they have going on. The boys, obviously, this is obviously the incentive for the boys to go, or the fellas to go in and solve this problem. And he encounters the unliked mayor, or the unpopular mayor and his um, guards, and he straight up starts picking fights with these dudes. He spends time in, like, he does jail time because he fucking insults him. Acting being the small domino, which being the one to topple the largest domino. Yes. Yeah. But, so, yeah, Acting's a great catalyst. I think at one point I did break Acting's player by putting him through the most craziest solo. Everybody does their own thing, kind of downtime adventure. Before the campaign died, and man, I sometimes I think like I kind of miss tormenting this big oaf. Anyways, so these were the fellas. They like I said earlier, they volunteered to fight and solve the goblin problem. Essentially, locals in town have been dealing with goblin sightings, and with goblins showing up and essentially possibly stealing stuff from them. Other characters include. Let me see if I can find these dudes. I know they're in here somewhere. But yeah. So this whole city hall was like, "What are you gonna? And what's to be done about these goblins, Mr. Mayor? Like, they're stealing our stuff, dude." And the mayor's just like, "Well, goblins are they're just a myth. Who's to say what is a goblin? What is a goblin essentially? Is it me? Is it you? What? I mean, who's to say what is a goblin and what isn't? And the guards, which again, one of the reasons why Farmer Woodhawk went to the fellas for help instead of the local authorities, because one stupid excuse, which by the way, to admit to my players who are watching this stream right now, I will freely admit that every time I use the excuse of it's an election year, I could not come up with a better excuse, honestly. I just thought like it's just a stupid excuse that could that would sound plausible enough by a politician to not want to or at least for like the local authorities or in like the city guard not to help. So here's another picture of Actian I drew to kind of play around with his design. He's very Greek hero inspired. But here's the rest of the town, or at least the important guys. What is a goblin? Little piles. Yeah, actually. I mean, goblins. I mean, to be fair, when you met those goblins guys, they were hoarding a bunch of the most secrets possible. So it's not far from the truth. So, anyways, here are the other town folk. We have. How do I do this? So we have the mayor himself, Mayor Ban Jensen, two characters that showed up in the background, show up to deliver one line in in the town hall. Stony Jorad and Woodford Leach, the blacksmith and jeweler, respectively. Captain Lurs, the local guard, or really the captain guard. Woodhawk, early design. Cookie and Virginia, these two characters, are in charge of the local inn/tavern, which I guess an inn has a tavern in it, but they're in charge of the local inn, which is known as the Pitt City Hall, because it's right across the, I guess, it's like directly across from the actual city hall, and most people tend to respect them and their thoughts more than the actual mayor. Yes, it's her. And actually, here's the first design for her I had. So, that's Virginia. My first thought was like, all right, guys, let me design a big booby dark elf just to entice the lads, see if they fall for my waifu traps. And no, the closest I got to was maybe acting ogling her. But don't worry, she has like there's a nice epilogue to this adventure. Cookie cameo in current current campaign. Yeah, I know. I was there when that happened. Cookie's a brass dragonborn. He ended up becoming one of Kyojiro's favorite characters. Virginia was kind of again, I made a character up that was supposed to be like, oh yeah, these guys are gonna totally want to like hook up with this dark elf, and she was just gonna be like, tch, and like brush them off. But there were other, oh yeah, and then here's just a guard captain design, or just regular guard design. But there was another character who became more of an important influence amongst them. Specifically, when they went to the bar to kind of get more info on the specifically, actually right here. Here's the inn and here's the city hall. So I forgot to have the map out here. So city hall is right here. The inn is right there. Blacksmith is over here. Actually, I think no, never mind. I was right. Cooper's right next to it, etc., etc. But here are the other two important NPCs that showed up. Hey, it's me, cigarette and cornbread. And cornbread. These local layabouts, Danny Wary and Lua Nabaloni, aka Cigarette and Cornbread, the tiefling and the halfling, who essentially kind of just hang out around town and they're just kind of local like delinquents, even though they're like grown ass men and they're like who are like maybe middle aged, but they're local bums. And they ended up becoming bigger characters. Essentially, Actian, in one of his classic moments of... No, actually, it was Kyojiro this time. Kyojiro, in an unreasonably racist moment, straight up says, like, come on, tiefling, tell us something. So they end up becoming some kind of, like, they ended up becoming some, like, brief informants, and then before obviously joining the group proper as little NPC followers. But they provide some hints and clues to where to go. And where do they go? Back to the overworld map. Ye Old Railway Station, which is where a lot of these goblin sightings tend to be. And there's the overworld map for that. Which leads me into the first opening image for the DNDFellas. Because during this first session, as Kyojiro, Actian, and Nihilus are off trying to explore and find this railway station, little Veril was happily taking a nap because Terumo they could not make our first session, and we played without him. So I just said, he's asleep. It's okay. It's session 1. He's asleep. He overslept during all this. So while these guys were fighting a tiger in the woods, Veril was Mimir. So, and that's our first session. Session 2 had our chums going back to exploring this abandoned railway station, because part of the problem that had happened with Pine Ward was essentially the train wasn't coming to the railway station anymore. And in fact, there's an abandoned railway yard nearby. But because it hadn't been coming by, in order to even get to and like drop off supplies to Pine Ward and be connected to the railroad, people had to walk up from the city towards this junction here. So instead of showing up and just being part of the railway network or whatever, the railroad, it fell into disrepair because of some bad dealings that were going on in the background. So they explore it. There's 2 traps here. They approach from here. There's like a tripwire. There's a pit over here. There's a couple little like bed rolls for the goblins and like a chest, a little extra escape thing. But so they're just exploring this abandoned railway yard. And it was also during this session where I had another one of the players. Unfortunately, how can I put this? He was late, and I didn't want to keep going, so I decided what's to be done about this man who is comatose, whose player is not present. Like, what do I do with him? Like, what do I do? So I just had him suddenly just be distracted, and while he was distracted, the other fellas explored the area, and Actian ended up being captured by goblins. So, their first goblin encounter, and their biggest fella got captured by a bunch of little guys. Actually one of my favorite like picks here. One of my favorite like drawings I did, because just I like how they're just kind of looking. It's like, I wonder what that means. Also, just like, I don't know, there's like a cool kind of Gulliver's Travels aspect of it. And it was fall when this is happening, so, I mean, I think if I could change it one thing, I'd probably define the tree tops a bit more instead of just kind of abstracting it like this, but anyways, you live, you learn. So, these fellas fight the goblins, manage to, like, scare off a bunch of them, kill one, and then kidnap 2. Actually, no, they ended up rather knocking out 2 and bringing them back in. And Nihilus, which is one of my favorite things that Saber did as Nihilus, was he used his detect magic, like invocation, his essentially like this little like kind of like witches. I can't remember what it's called, but essentially his little detect magic style like free invocation to like see if there was anything weird going on, and he uncovered a little disguise element that had been going on that the goblins had been using. But essentially they had like a fake owlbear like disguise. It was like this kind of like little crude mecha covered in like an owlbear skin. That they had kind of used like a magical glamour on to make it look real. So that's how they've been sneaking around, like the area, like the whole around Pine Ward in the woods undetected. And they hid it right behind here. Essentially, the goblins were using this area as like a way to just kind of like hide out and like as like it was just like a little like halfway hideout, halfway point hideout. But they bring back the goblins. The goblins, like the guards is like, oh cool, goblin problem solved, nice. But the mayor's just like, I don't know, I've never heard of these goblins. These goblins look kind of sus. We'll put them in jail and figure out things in the morning. And then Actian started acting up, hence the name. Actian acts up. That's what he does, and he decides to mouth off towards the mayor, and he ends up getting thrown. Goblins for real in a mech, yes. Actian acts up, which is what he does, and he ends up getting sent off to jail, and he spends a night in jail in the same jail cell as the goblins. And while he sleeps, while he mimirs peacefully, without a care in the world, next morning he wakes up and he finds the goblins dead. These goblins, one of whom picked a fight with him, the other who he befriended because of their, I guess, shared hunting experience and background, he decides, oh yeah, I think I will now be friends with the goblins, even though one of them tried to like steal my gruel. You know, I love the part of the campaign when the acting said it's acting time, and he acts all over the goblins. One of the most characters of all time. Yeah, I love that about Actian too. So, anyways, Actian acts. He falls in love with these goblins because it's like, you hunt, I hunt. That makes us best friends now. The next morning he finds his new best friends dead, murdered. And then the guards come in. It's like, well. Looks like big fella killed the little fellas. And Actian just has a heroic essentially like goes into like a coma. He essentially like his mind breaks. Just like, no, I didn't kill. No, it was. I think one of my favorite things is, I can't remember if it was Kyojiro or Nihilist that said, "All right, Actian, we're gonna open your jail cell, and when you come out, you're gonna come out peacefully, and we're gonna settle this normally, okay?" And Actian was all Walter White shocked. Yes. He's like, yeah, And then as soon as they opened that gate, Actian like burst out. He like shoved his way through the guards. He's like, I gotta get out of here. To which then Vero used one of his high level spells and cast Hold Person on this bozo. And pretty much just like froze him in place. To which then they used to like kind of calm him down and take him outside. And Actian was still having it was like in the greatest shock possible, while the fellas were just like, I don't know what we do next, guys. I mean, our one clue is gone. It's dead. To which the mayor and the captain is like, all right, well, here's what happened. You solved the goblin problem. These goblins are dead. So we're going to assume there will be no more goblin encounters in the city. Congrats. But because we hate your friend and he sucks, you're not welcome back to Pine Ward. So please leave. We don't want to see you back here again. Thanks for helping us, but we hate you. So which leads to another issue, which was, how do the guys help Pine Ward help this goblin situation if they're not allowed in the city they're trying to help? Now, most adventurers would be like, well, job well done. Let's go home and let's go out for some frosty chocolate milkshakes. But not the D&D fellas. They thought, this doesn't sit well, it doesn't seem right. And then I think once Actian snapped out of it, he's like, you know what, guys? Actian got a server banned. Yes, he did. Actian was pretty much just like, guys, when I was in prison with my new best friends, they told me that their whole tribe, this noble goblin tribe, was being manipulated by some punk ass hobgoblin. They have their queen captured. It is up to us to restore the balance. And I think the other fellow's just like, yeah, okay, let's go back and investigate that whole situation. And then I think Actian was just like, what we need to do is find more clues. We need to find I guess, ways to appeal to these creatures. And they ended up exploring the wilderness around the area, which led to them fighting a giant constrictor snake in a nearby stream. which resulted in this, my favorite image, and I think the first image I drew here. So essentially what happened is Kyojiro and Actian stripped naked and said, we need to shower. We're gonna we're gonna take a bath in the water. In the stream. The stream looks real nice and inviting. I'm sure nothing dangerous is in the water. Let's dip. And while they dipped, a giant constrictor snake showed up and tried to kill them. And they ended up fighting it and chasing it away. Nihilist used one of his spell slots to cast Mind Spike, which was great. And pretty much was like, I know where he is. We just gotta keep fighting. Like this guy, you can't escape me. Snake! Shocker! You can't escape me. I'll follow you to the ends of the earth. And yeah, pretty much they ended up killing the snake. And Actian and Kyojiro, like, carried the snake. They kind of pretty much chopped up the, like, you know, they took care of the remains. You know, they went, you know, they saved the snake meat. They had a bunch of super-sized snake skin, and Vero, using his Outlander skills, pretty much was like, all right, I know how to take out these snake fangs and use them for stuff, which he never did. And of course, we have Nihilus looking like Jim from The Office here. Still one of my favorites. So they decided to go back and investigate the area where they met those goblins, hoping that maybe we'll encounter more goblins. Who knows? And the result actually was not encountering more goblins, but actually encountering yet again Cigarette and Cornbread being hassled by a bunch of guards. To which my favorite thing is, here's the thing. This is why these players, they never, like, one thing I loved about these guys was most players would be like, how many guards are there? Yeah, we can take them. Let's take them out. Most players would just be like, let's kill all the guards and save these two delinquents. But Kyojiro and like Nihilus were just like, let's be diplomatic about this. Let's talk to these guys. And they pretty much like talked their way through into like letting them like leaving Danny and Lewin in their care, essentially. Which is like, Which, by the way, I was going to tell you guys, you could have won that fight. That fight was definitely winnable. And you guys decided, nah, let's not fight the guards. We don't want to make more. I mean, I don't know what you're explaining. I don't know if you guys ever told me why you chose not to fight the guards. I don't know if it was because you thought you guys were outnumbered or if the guards outclassed you guys, but you could have taken them pretty easily. Honestly, they were meant to be like an easy fight if you chose to fight them. But it did put you. We would have been server banned and killed their bots. Yeah. So the funny thing is, that was a fun move. Actually, that in retrospect, I'm glad you thought of it that way. Because right now at work, I have two coworkers who like D&D and want to play 5e, so I've been kind of running a break time game. And these dudes are willing to fight everyone. In fact, our first session had one of my players who was playing a Black Dragonborn immediately like spit acid on a bunch of like local street toughs because they spoke to them badly. We are adventurers, not savages. Yeah, my current players are definitely savages. Like I said, my current Dragonborn player straight up is using any like he's willing to like use his breath weapon to spit acid on any dudes whenever possible. So savages. The beast will mate with your children. So they get hey, Um, so the fellas add Danny and Lewin to their team. That's still being called Cigarette and Cornbread. They actually do have connections and make frequent. Um, they do have connections with the goblins and lead them towards the rail yard where are located. And tells them like, look, you guys need to you guys need to come in on some kind of friendly reason, you know. Yeah, you need to bring. Yeah, guys, you need to bring some kind of thing. There's some good fellas. They truly are, except for Actian. So they decide, hey, what about that snake meat? What about that snake meat and that snake skin? Um, that we got. Well, actually, I messed up the timeline. They go back to investigate that area to see if they can find more, and then the hunting episode happens. And now that they got all that snake meat and snake skin, that's what they're going to use as leverage towards. They're going to use that leverage, use it as like tribute to kind of buy their way into their camp, which is located here. I never drew it out. I always had plans to map out their railway yard, but essentially it was going to be an abandoned railway yard where all these goblins had essentially built their little like village, their little their lair around, like in and around the railway cars, with the most fancy luxury railway car being used for their queen. And as we get there, as we approach there, they do end up meeting. So they do end up gaining access to it. Essentially, Danny and Lewin help convince them that like, hey, these guys are here to help. They know stuff, and they meet. I don't know if you guys ever told me how you felt about this character, but in my head, I like to think that you guys hated him. But they do meet the current leader of these bozos, or not these. Sorry, that's wrong to say because they're not bad. They do meet their current leader, the guy who's essentially enslaved them all. Zag the Despicable, a hobgoblin edgelord with a sword of sharpness and a pistol and like a flintlock pistol on him. He wears a spiked up trench coat that is actually a coat of a coat of the bat. Yes, the Reddit mod. There you go. He has a cloak of the bat that has been modified into a trench coat, and he wears a wide brim hat. And this guy was supposed to suck. These guys were supposed to hate him. And then also his bodyguard, the dreaded Banthurk. So I know Terumo is probably going to have some major PTSD with Banthurk. But they meet these two, and these guys are the dudes who are essentially ruining the lives of these goblins. They're the ones who've been telling the goblins, hey, while we hold your queen captive, how about you do all these little crimes for me? I'm trying to find the thing that's hidden in Pit City that's going to help me get revenge on Rumo and Shambles. That's going to help me get revenge on my enemies, and I know it's stashed somewhere in Pit City. I just couldn't find it at the time. So you guys are gonna help me while they keep your queen captive. And he pretty much keeps a bunch of goblins whose limbs. Marlo still has nightmares. He essentially uses a sword of sharpness to essentially whack off limbs off of some of these some of their strongest goblin warriors and pretty much keeps them around and alive as like reminders. Like, if you act up, I'll chop your limbs off too, you little bastards. And I got Panther Cure to back me up. So you really want to take us on? The answer was no. They chose to essentially give in. There's a shaman amongst them who is kindly and old and just like, please help us. Also, all the goblins speak in a Cockney accent. I think before my prior campaign, I always had the goblins kind of speak in a weird, like, goblin accent. They all talk like this. But I think somewhere along the way, I just decided, what if he just speaks? What if they all just spoke in a cool Cockney accent? And that's what I stuck with. So now all the goblins speak like, all right, look here. Here's the problem. Dying the life of a true Brexit goblin. Wake up and meet the Queen. I meet the Queen, Goblina, or Margwen. More little prick. Anyways, so they meet. So right off the bat, they meet their leader, the guy who's pulling all the strings, causing all the goblin sightings and goblin thievery that's going on in town, and they definitely hate this dude. He sucks. They also see their queen locked up in a gilded cage. So that's Margwen herself. And they pretty much decide, like, yeah, so we need to probably help here. Eight Zag, eight Banter, love me queen, simple as. Yeah, pretty much. That's the goblin ideology. I can't find the drawing I did of their shaman, but he spoke like Michael Caine. So it was pretty much like, the problem is, we need you fellas to help us kill Zag, and if you do, we get our queen back. I'm not gonna betray my queen. I will not betray my tribe. I love my queen, but I'll never betray my tribe. In the meantime, we will do as Zag says until we find some way to overthrow him. So how do they? What does Zag want them to do? I'll tell you. The mayor has a little stoolie, a little sidekick named Umberto, who is a Kenku. And he pretty much says, that Kenku is like his little personal spy. I need you to get him and bring him back here. I would like to have his little spy in my control, so I have more power over the mayor now. Because I've been blackmailing the mayor into turning a blind eye so my goblins can find the thing I'm looking for in Pit City. So the guy is begrudgingly help him and decide, alright, well, I guess this is what we have to do. And as they leave the village to go find Umberto, who shows up but Umberto? And immediately, a fight ensues, a chase ensues, which ended in the most horrible CBT I have ever DM'd in my life. The only CBT I've ever DM'd in my life. These guys, I don't know who started it. yes, CBT. I don't know who started it. I really don't. I can't remember at this point, but someone said Kyodro whack his pee-pee. And he did. He whacked his pee-pee. They all whacked his pee-pee. Kyodro used his veteran's cane to turn into a long sword. They whack his crotch with the flat of the blade. Nihilus cast chill touch on his balls while he was being held down by Actian. And of course, the worst of all, the worst of all, this right here. Viral cast inflict wounds right on poor Umberto's balls and bird balls, and yeah, it's the end. The man cannot have children. You cannot have sons. You ruined this man. You slapped his nuts, for God's sakes. So nut slappery happened, and they captured him. They brought him in, and immediately started to interrogate and torture him. Actually, specifically, Zag started to torture him, and Actian made it worse by essentially threatening to eat Umberto because he's a bird person. And I assure you, performing CBT is absolutely necessary to progress in the part of the campaign. It surely was, because guess what happened? You want to talk about small domino becoming big domino? Here's a domino effect that Actian pushed forward. These guys, because they CBT'd him, and then Actian flipped out when he found out that the one who killed his newfound goblin friends in jail was Umberto, ordered by the mayor to frame Actian. Once he found out that it was Umberto who killed him, and then pinned it on Actian at the mayor's orders, Actian flipped out and pretty much was like now wanting to like kill and eat this bird man, this like Kenku dude. So because of that, because of just how much of an overly intense punk ass Actian was, he pretty much pushed Umberto over the edge. So essentially, they were going to have Umberto go the next day and like tell and pretty much just like inform. To be fair, it was Mayor's fault for trying to frame Actian. It is okay. That is fair, but also Actian. I don't know. Actian was going to kill those goblins until he befriended them. So I don't know. Typical D&D player mentality. Everything is an enemy until it becomes my friend, and then in which case I will treat them as if we've been friends for our entire lives. But specifically, now that they were going to convince Umberto to return and essentially deliver more messages, like a message from Zag about, we know, bitch, so give up, or whatever. I can't remember what the message was, but essentially they were going to send him back the next morning. But that night, now that they had totally gained Zag's trust, that's when Danny and Lewin came back and just like, hey, so here's the situation. I spoke to the shaman, and we've set it up so you guys can attack, get your weapons back and attack Zag while he's defenseless. At a certain point, while the goblins are making food, Panther goes out and makes sure that they don't try to poison him. Also, this is the point where we can have a goblin show up and polish Zag's sword of sharpness, so he's completely defenseless. And they're the D&D fellas just like, yeah, all right. So they wait for the signal, and for them to leap into action, which will create this boss battle, essentially. And they wait for the signal. They see Panther hanging out, trying to, or not hanging out, but inspecting, making sure the food isn't poisoned or anything, and making sure that the goblins are up to their old tricks. Actian, at this point, because he's such a wild card, has been thinking very hard about how to test, about wanting to pick a fight to befriend Panther. He sees him as a big, strong enemy, and he really, really wants to like either fight him or befriend him. And while they and to distract him, Danny and Lewin step in, and Danny's just like, "Hey man, you're pretty big. Can you lift me up? Come on, I bet you can lift me up." So Zag looks like too excited for what is about to happen. So the fellas see the goblin sword polisher go in. And another goblin hiding underneath the his now like edged out luxury car. Signal that they've got their weapons ready underneath the like right underneath the little steps that lead to the door. So they go over there. Panther's distracted thanks to Danny, and as soon as they're about to like essentially bust in, Zag kicks out the goblin sword polisher, and he sees the fellas standing there right in front of him, like fully armed. To which then the battle starts. Veril and Actian, I think they like start shooting at him because one of Veril's signature weapons, aside from his, actually I would say more than his mace, is his crossbow. I feel like Veril like uses a crossbow more often than he did his mace. So Actian and Veril immediately start firing stuff off with their mace. I mean, with their longbows and light crossbows, while Kyojuro and Nihilus, well, specifically Kyojuro, essentially tries to like sword fight him. They take the battle inside. For some reason, Actian's player wasn't paying attention to the geography of the situation, so he was trying to fire off his arrows inside the from outside of the outside of the train car into the train car, while Kyojuro, Veril, and Nihilus all fought him inside and pretty much took care of him pretty quickly. Like, pretty much Kyojuro like killed him in like I think a couple of like hits, because I do want to reiterate, if Tav is still watching this, Tav rolled a like 20, or he rolled like high numbers for his strength stat as a fighter, which led him to having a +5 to every fucking hit he had. So he managed to like outclass and kill Zag pretty easily. And then as soon as that part of the fight was over, before Acton could even get a chance to go in, Panther shows up, punches Actian, and sends him flying like 10 feet away, 15 feet away. And then the real fight starts. Because Panther shows up, goes in, punches Veril, and almost pretty much takes out like more than half of his hit points and sends him flying into a couch, while Kyojuro and Nihilus fight him. Nihilus whips out Witch Bolt and essentially like hard carries, like becomes DPS for this round. He uses up his one spell slot he gets between short rests to cast Witch Bolt to like kind of have a constant like stream of lightning hitting Panther, while then Panther just decides that's it. A moment where everybody realized Kyojuro was going to be the goat of the group. Panther then, I think Veril then cast Cure Wounds on himself. Was very tentative about returning to the fight because he almost got killed in one punch. That's when all unlimited power on Panther. Yes, he did. That was one of my favorite moments. But then Panther was like, "Oh heck no," and pretty much used his daunting roar to make everybody like check to see if they pissed their pants in front of him. of which actually the only thing that happened was Nihilus losing concentration on Witch Bolt, which then Pantic decided, I'm gonna beat up that nerd now. I'm gonna beat up the guy with the glasses. He beats up. It pretty much goes after Nihilus. Nihilus then decides to like see if he can figure out a way to distract Pantheric by casting Prestidigitation to distract him and break away from combat, which is incredibly smart. I let him have. I mean, some could argue, oh, that's not how Prestidigitation would work, or whatever. It's like, but no, I think the creativity behind that usage deserved. I pretty much deserved to like be utilized. So I let Nihilus have that. That was great. Pantheric pretty much was like 1v1ing, or was 1v4ing Varel, Nihilus, Kyodro, and Actian, who'd finally gotten up. That guy with the glasses was the Walker Nihilus' patron all the time. Yes, that's something Saber needs to admit. But this fight with Pantheric lasted far longer because Pantheric had martial arts stats. So every hit that he landed, and he had multiple attacks every round, could cause whatever target of his hit to either be like knocked down or pushed away. So he could essentially hold the fort down, and he had a hit. He had a hit for every guy attacking him. Is that what we're retconning now? No, come on. Technically, Nihilus was that guy with the glasses. But this fight versus Pantheric lasted far longer than Zag, because Pantheric had actual skills and abilities that were far more dangerous than Zag's Sword of Sharpness. Or Sword of Sharpness. But eventually... Oh, by the way, before I get to the final defeat of Pantheric, Actian in close combat is awful. He rolled a lot of very bad rolls for this, unfortunately. He tried to go in there with his duels. He was a scrub. He would try to go in there with his like dual short swords and ended up like pretty much hitting half of every hit that he had. Like every 2 rounds, I would say, against Pantheric, he would roll so low, and Pantheric would just like bop him. So yeah, it was a very interesting situation to behold. But eventually, Varel got the last hit. He went in there with his mace, just like, it's time for me to face my fears, and delivered the final defeating blow against Pantheric. And they had Pantheric pretty much before Pantheric could before they could kill him. Pantheric wanted to like give him his like